the Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
You know our next guest best for being on the Howard Stern Show for about 15 years. What a wild ride that must have been. But what about before the Howard Stern Show? What was he doing? A lot of stuff. New documentary out called The Joke Man, which I believe you can stream everywhere right now. Jackie the Joke Man Martling, my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber. So tell me a little about yourself, Jackie. Born on Valentine's Day. What a beautiful gift you were to mom and dad.
I did a movie where I had to make out all afternoon with Florence Henderson.
Really?
And it turned out, that's in the documentary, and Florence Henderson, of course, was born on Valentine's Day.
Really?
So the coincidence there was just amazing. And here's this, at the time, she was 70, and she was so cute and so wonderful. And we sat there, we were in the background of a scene, and it was her grandson in the movie that was the main guy in the movie. So we're in the background, French kissing and making out and licking hot dog mustard and ketchup, and it was just great. And where did you see it in the movie? It's just great.
I can't wait.
Yeah, that was called Venus and Vegas.
Okay.
And everybody's Joe Rogan's in it, and Molly Sims, I think she came and went, and the guy from Scrubs, and Eddie K. Thomas, or what, a lot of people in there came and went, and it just was a whole hoot. The whole world was in this stupid movie, but it was great fun.
So you grew up on Long Island. What?
Yes, I was born in Mineola, but I grew up in a little tiny hamlet called East Norwich, just south of Oyster Bay, and now I live just north of Oyster Bay in Bayville. And people are like, wow, the North Shore of Nassau County, Long Island, is like one of the wealthiest areas in the entire world. I'm like, well, I wish somebody had told my family, because my grandfather was a blacksmith, and growing up, his blacksmith barn was on the corner of our property.
Right.
Of course, he had been dead since the middle of the Second World War, so I never met the guy. But he actually was never the same after he got kicked in the mid-30s. He got kicked in the head by one of the horses he was trying to put shoes on.
Oh, jeez.
Which is a nice thank you.
Right.
But,
right.
So I'm not from Wealth, but I'm from Long Island.
So your grandfather was a blacksmith. What about your dad? What did your mom and dad do for work?
My mother was brilliant and worked at Grumman, and she had a plaque that said that she helped win the war. But then when she got married, like everybody else in 1948, the women got married and became housewives and raised 4 kids. And my father worked as a surveyor and worked for the town, but his uncle, my great uncle, was a monster in politics. He was the national chairman of the Republican Party in the 50s, and my great uncle Leonard W. Hall was Dwight Eisenhower's campaign manager for both of his landslide wins.
Wow.
And so my father had a, politically connected job. He was deputy superintendent of highways. And here's some great trivia. I don't know if you'll know who this is, but my father was deputy superintendent of highways, and his boss was the superintendent of highways, was Thomas Pynchon, who was the father of the world-famous author Thomas Pynchon. Have you ever heard of that guy?
I'm not very well read, Jackie.
No, and I wouldn't know who it was if it wasn't from my hometown. But he's a recluse, and nobody knows where he's from. So when I say, yeah, he's from my hometown, they're like, you're full of crap. I'm like, well, listen, his sister was one of the few people that tried to babysit me and my brother, and his mother played golf with my mother. And when his first book came out, his mother actually complained to my mother that her son wrote a book, but she couldn't tell the women at the church about it because it was so filthy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unbelievable.
So
I got to turn off this. I didn't turn off my girlfriend's business answering machine.
Oh, okay.
No, but go ahead.
So you went to school at Michigan. You studied
you all for an immediate...
Mechanical engineering, class of 71, Michigan State University.
Mechanical engineering. I mean, it's kind of an old joke, with us radio guys. We always tell our kids, a mechanical engineering degree costs the same amount as communication. So what were you trying to become by majoring in mechanical engineering at Michigan State?
What I was trying to do, and this is absolutely serious, I was trying to not flunk out of college.
Really?
I knew if I didn't take a difficult major, I would, how do I do this? If I didn't take a difficult major, I know I would have drank myself, and I would have just drank myself out of college. My father had he was a mechanical engineer for like a year or two when he went to school, and I was really good, at math and calculus, and I was in advanced studies in high school and stuff. But I had no intention of ever becoming any kind of an engineer or anything. I'm walking around Michigan State University in 1970. I got on shorts and I got a ponytail down the middle of my back and bare feet and my dog. And we're walking along in the engineering building, and I'm this crazy hippie. But meanwhile, the other guys are cheating off my exams. You know what I mean?
Right.
And and here we are at the end of school, and this guy's like, "Oh, I just got a job with Ford, $35,000 in a car. Oh, I just got a job with GE, $28,000. They give me a house." I didn't go for one stupid interview. I was playing in a rock and roll band and getting drunk and getting stoned, and I stayed in East Lansing, Michigan, for an extra 2 years. I spent 7 years in East Lansing because a college town, it's a bubble.
Right.
It's a party bubble, and it just, life was so good. Why anybody would ever want to leave? And finally, you get your heart broken, and you realize you got to get the hell out. I finally got the hell out of there, and then went to Denver and worked construction for 6 months, and that's all that took.
Wow. Yeah, I bet.
Construction, and said, "Well, I'm done." My hands were so full of calluses I couldn't play my guitar, and I said, "All right, I'm going home to New York and playing my guitar till something happens." And what happened was I found out how rotten I was at music. But I started telling my jokes on stage, and I never looked back.
So it was college, it was construction a little bit. You're playing in a rock and roll band, and then you discover stand-up comedy. How does that connect to radio and getting hooked up with Howard Stern?
I got to send you a copy of my autobiography because it's kind of fun. I played in band in high school and then played, of course, in a band all through college. And then after 4 or 5 months of construction in Denver, I bailed out of there. And my old partner from high school, I said, "Listen, let's have a band. We'll write songs and we'll tell jokes." And he said, "Sounds good to me." So we had a 2-man band for the 70s. We traveled around in a 1955 bright yellow Cadillac hearse.
Oh, man.
And played our songs and told our jokes. And, and I just had amassed all these jokes over my lifetime. They have always stuck in my head, and I've always loved them so much and always laughed when I told them. That's just how I was. And at the end of the 70s, we had added a keyboard player, and, I'm telling jokes and I wrote like 90% of the songs and told 90% of the jokes. And one night after the gig, I call it the dressing room, but we're in the room where they keep all the bottles of beer. And the other two guys said to me, "Listen, Jackie, my old partner said me and Herbie are going to leave the band and start our own band."
Right.
I said, "Wait a minute. Listen here, I'm not a rocket scientist, but if there's 3 guys in the band and 2 of them leave to start their own band, that's kicking me out of the band." Oh, it's like it is. So then I played guitar and told jokes and played guitar and told jokes, and then I bumped into some guys, and it's a whole long story. And I wound up at Richard M. Dixon's White House Inn with Bob Nelson and Rob Bartlett and Eddie Murphy and all these characters. And then in 1979, that's where I dropped the pin of starting stand-up comedy. That was the first time I told jokes and played the guitar, as opposed to playing the guitar and telling jokes.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was And for the whole first year, I was a stand-up comic. I actually had my guitar on the whole time, playing little snippets of parodies and telling jokes and being an idiot. And finally, I dropped the guitar and I just told jokes and told jokes. And I worked at a music studio in the 70s. That's a whole long story. But from working at the music studio, I realized any idiot could make an album. So after I had only been a comic for like 6 months, I had all these great shows on cassette, and I just transferred them to reel and borrowed $100 from 15 different people and sent the master tape and a few pictures and a few dollars to Nashville. And I'll tell you, when I went to Port Authority in Manhattan to pick up my 1,000 albums,
right,
you would have thought I cured cancer. I thought I died and went to heaven. But this is 1979.
Right.
And I'm standing at the door as people are leaving the comedy shows, and I'm selling albums. And the guys are making fun of me.
Right.
And this is like nobody else knew how. I mean, of course, Bob Newhart and Bill Cosby, those guys had albums, but they were with major labels. Nobody made their own album.
Right.
Not even Red Fox in the 50s. There was a tiny record company, and these guys are making fun of me. And then all of a sudden one night, like, somebody saying, you know what, we made $50 a piece tonight, and Martling made an extra $75 selling his stupid records. Maybe he's not that big an idiot. But then I made another record, and then I made another record, and me and my future ex-wife, Nancy Sirianni, was sending them everywhere. If I met you, I sent you stuff. And the amount of stories I have that people still come up to me and tell me how they wound up with my albums. And just one of the groups of 3 records, by the time I had 3 records, we were sending them everywhere. And I heard about this crazy guy that got fired in Washington, D.C., and the club owner down there that owned Garvin's Laugh-In said, you really should hook up with this guy, Howard Stern. He's a nut. He's going to New York. So I just mailed my albums blind to this guy. I never heard of him. I never listened to the radio. I was a hippie. I listened to CBS FM oldies,
Right.
And all of a sudden Nancy called me, and I'm in my mother's attic. The first joke lands, my mother's attic, where I had my dial-a-joke. And she goes, that guy Howard Stern called. He wants you to call him. I called up and said, hey, Jackie, this is Howard Stern. We listened to your records. You know every joke. We think you'd be a lot of fun. You want to come hang out on the radio today? So that's 30 Rockefeller Plaza as compared to working. I was producing the shows at Governor's Comedy Shop in Levittown on Long Island. So it's a pretty no-brainer. So I got in the car and went in, and I walked in, and there's Howard and Robin and Fred, and I sat down, and we laughed our asses off for 4 hours. And at the end of the show, Howard said, you're a lot of fun. Why don't you come back next week? So I came back once a week for 3 years for free.
Wow.
And, just kind of assimilated myself, just kind of worked my way into the program, passing Howard notes, giving him ideas. And then he got fired, and then he got rehired at K-Rock, and then all of a sudden he went to mornings, and he put me on 2 days a week, and I went from 2 days to 5 days very fast because he was a lot funnier the days I was there, making him funnier.
Yeah.
And then we went to the moon. And then, then 15 years of station after, I think it got up to like 55 stations, and we were number one. And I say we. He was number one in like a good deal of the 55 stations, and it was just the most exciting ride in the world.
I bet. I
was very lucky, but luck favors the prepared.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I agree with you. If you're not lucky, you're prepared. I totally agree with you 100%. So tell me, it sounds like your big break. I would consider that whole story pretty incredible. I would consider your big break, though, possibly, agree with me or disagree, when you went from, 1 day to 2 days to 5 days and you're earning real money. I mean, you start off on that show for free for 3 years. Was your big break? What do you consider your big break? Was it some part of that story, or was it your first check?
My big break was Howard Stern opening the package with my records.
Right. Okay.
He opened it and he said, even though they were homemade records, who knew? He's new to New York City. Here's a comedian with 3 albums out. This guy must have something on the ball. And then that was my big break. Him opening those packages. Who knows what would have happened? when we went to mornings, the first two, I was working for just such little money, and that's why for the whole 15 years I was scraping, clawing, and complaining and walking off the show, because I started at such, like, if I'm paying you 5 cents an hour, and then I pay you 10 cents an hour, and I say, well, listen, I doubled your salary. Yeah, well, yeah, but so it was always a fight, but it just, 2 to 3 to 5 days just happened fast, just because there was such a difference when I wasn't there. But him opening the records, I'd say, was the absolute, that was the big break. Maybe putting down my guitar was a pretty big break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that joke line that has been something that still goes on today, I believe. I could call the joke line right now, can I?
516-922-WINE. What happened was there was no comedy on Long Island. It didn't exist. And when I first met my friend Richie Minervini, it's a whole long story, but there was this very cheap club owner who doubled up the shows at his club, and they had the auditions for the Gong Show, and I saw these guys trying to be comedians. I said, I'm as funny as these guys. And I met Richie, and we became good friends, and I went over to Richard M. Dixon's White House Inn, and that's where I met Eddie Murphy and Rob Bartlett and Bob Nelson and all these comics. But the guy wouldn't pay us. He was only paying us $5 a piece. And it was, so me and Richie found a place. We said, listen, we'll do a comedy show, and you let us keep the door, and you can have all the drinks and the booze and the food. And the guy said, all right. We started the show on a Tuesday night in Huntington at this club called Cinnamon, and we had no money. We didn't know anybody. And I'm like, how are we going to promote this? And I got the bright idea, why don't I get a phone line? I'll put some jokes on the phone and then say where we're working and then tell some more jokes. And it's just basic television, radio, the same old thing. A little bit of content, a little bit of commercial, a little bit of content.
Right.
The most basic thing. And I still remember where I was when calling it "use your finger" hit me. I said, God, that couldn't be more perfect. Use your finger. And I went to the place, and at the time, the little hamlet where I grew up was burgeoning so fast. The only available phone numbers in that exchange started with 9. So I started looking at different things, and 922-9463. I said, is that available? And she said, yes. And that spelled wine.
Right.
So I got 516-922-WINE, and it was immediately busy all the time. And I went from 1 line to 2 to 4 to 6 to 10. And every time I increased it, this is in my mother's attic.
Wow.
Actually, phone mate answering machines. And every time I added lines, the new foreman would come with the technician because they wanted to see it in person. And the phone company loved me. They just thought it was so silly and so fun, and it was infamous. And then Rick Dees got a hold of it, and Rick Dees used to tell his audience in California, he was the #1 morning drive, and he used to tell people that 516-922-9463 was Tom Selleck's home phone number. So people went crazy, and we got up to somewhere between 5 and 20,000 calls a day. It was just insane. And I mean, I had stickers, and it was a running comedy gag because I put those stickers every place, all over the world. In Nashville, out in the middle of nowhere, and people would see them and they just go nuts. I'd stick them up in New York City, and the whole thing was just so crazy, and I couldn't let it go. Right now, it's like the second line in my home. I just couldn't give up the number.
No.
I still look over and I see that red light going off, and I'm like, there's somebody calling. I love when somebody comes up and says, Jackie, I used to call that stupid phone line of yours 30 years ago. And I love saying, well, yeah, dial it now. And they say, what are you talking about? And they take out their cell phone and dial the number. Hey, this is Jackie. I love it when you use your finger. And they almost die of a heart attack.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Watching a little bit of this documentary, I found out that you were a gymnast earlier on in your life. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's great because they decided to start a gymnastic team in Oyster Bay High School just when I got there. And it was ninth grade, and there was only like 6 of us. I mean, we literally used to go to gymnastic meets in the coach's car. Can you imagine nowadays going to the amount of insurance? We literally go, and on the way home we'd stop and get 15-cent hamburgers. It was the greatest bonding.
Right.
But there was very little gymnastics. So I was 3rd in Nassau County. That piece of tape, the fact that piece of tape exists is absurd, because a local guy who, East Norwich was a very small town, and this guy whose son was on the gymnastic team, he's like 3 years younger than me, this guy Walter Campagna, his father had one of those, I don't know if you would remember, they were these little 8mm Kodak cameras.
Oh, sure.
Like a 3-minute roll of film, and then you'd have to change it, and he brought the camera to film his son. But he filmed like an entire minute of my floor exercise routine. And then 20 years later, Walter says, hey, I got footage, and then I got it digitized. And it's unbelievable that exists. And I was 3rd in Nassau County, which is the county I'm from on the North Shore of Long Island. I mean, in Long Island. But in those days, nobody was any good. Like the guy that came in number 1 was unbelievable. But the guy who was number 2 was way, way down from him. And I was the 3rd best, but I was at the bottom. I was at the top of the bottom, or the bottom of the top, or whatever you call it.
Right.
I was nowhere near a natural gymnast. I worked my ass off. But people see that piece of tape and they're like, Jesus, you were doing that on the hard gym floor? And I'm saying, yeah, there was no such thing as a floor exercise mat in 1965. We're doing handsprings and backflips and all that stuff on the hardwood basketball court, And it was so much fun. And the fact that exists, people they go nuts. I'm an old guy. I mean, I was so enamored with JFK's youth council for the JFK's President's Council for Youth Fitness. Like, we were all doing pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups, and back then, you loved the president, you loved your country, and it was like it was a whole pride thing. So I was in good shape, and I enjoyed that, And from playing rock and roll all through high school and college, I managed to keep the belly off until, and then when I put down the guitar, I guess my belly said, well, now we got room to go out a little bit.
What do you think? What was your first job, Jack? Do you remember your very first job?
First job as?
Ever. First job you ever got a paycheck for, or under the table money?
I was so lucky. There were these guys that were busboys at Piping Rock Club, which is world famous. Piping Rock Club is a blue blood club on Long Island. There's the Piping Rock Club and the Creek Club. If you ever read the novel Gold Coast by Nelson DeMille, I mean, these places are so exclusive. If you were Jewish or Catholic, forget about being black or Spanish. If you were Jewish or Catholic, you could not get in there. These are the people, who directed the people how to get here on the Mayflower, right? And these guys worked there as busboys, and they called one of the guys on the gym team, and he was too lazy to get out of bed, and they called me, and I went over there with them, and the maitre d' loved me immediately, and within like a month, I was the head busboy at Piping Rock Club, and I enjoyed going to work there as much as I enjoyed going to play in my band or going to gymnastic meets.
Really?
It was like Fawlty Towers. It was, the head chef was German, and the butcher was Italian, and the baker was Hungarian, and the pantry man who made me into the guy who laughs at himself, he was from Holland, and the waitresses were all drunken women from Long Island, and the maitre d' was British, and the bartenders were Scottish, and I just can't explain the incredible mixture. It was like the United Nations there, And I still can see my first paycheck. It was $1.10 an hour for 8 hours.
Oh, man.
For $8.80 before taxes.
Oh,
and
man.
I still have pay stubs. And I love that place and the stories I have for that place. And then you don't realize it at the time how exclusive this place was. I mean,
Really?
it was unbelievable. You go to Google. You know what? It's the country club. It's the club where Cole Porter, a horse fell on him and broke both of his
Okay.
legs.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And that's
Wow.
just world famous.
I mean,
world famous.
you ever think about this, man? Do you ever think we're talking about your big break and all your jobs and all your experiences and playing music and telling jokes and construction? And I mean, you ever think if Stern never opened your letter, didn't find your album in there? I mean, the documentaries, the movies you're in.
Ask that. They say, well, you were so lucky. But meanwhile, Nancy and I sent out 300 packages with 3 albums in them, and they went everywhere.
Right.
I mean, they went everywhere. And yeah, Howard opened that up. But, I wouldn't, if there's a famous story or a famous joke, and I've always enjoyed it, people said to Hillary Clinton, yeah, people know who you are, and you do really well, and, you're getting very famous and everything, but you're married to the President of the United States. What if you were married to a gas station attendant? And you know what she said?
What'd she say?
She said, well, then he'd be president of the United States. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I hopped aboard, but I was that's the great thing about this documentary. It shows that I was an asset, a true asset.
No doubt.
I didn't just jump on and for the ride. I jumped on and helped the train get up to 90 miles an hour.
There's no doubt. If you weren't a part...
who knows where I would have wound up. I might have wound up in a drunk in the gutter, but we'll never know.
I mean, if you weren't a part of that show, I don't know if it would have amassed that type of popularity over those years that you were there.
Well, I'm not saying that.
I am.
There's no way to know. It's like anything,
No, sure. But I know what a big part of that show that you were, and I'm saying it. Do you still have a relationship with Howard? I know when it ended, it wasn't good, but years have gone on. So
well, the truth of it is there was never real animosity. Like, I mean, it got played up in the press and played up on the air, but that's show business.
Yeah.
Well, the bottom line of the whole thing was I had a job. And I asked my boss for a raise, and it was more than he wanted to pay, so I went home. And
right.
That's as simple as it was. And nowadays, I send him a happy birthday email, and he writes back and sends me a happy birthday email. And it's like there's no animosity, and it'll be very interesting to see if he winds up seeing this and his take on it, because there's no malarkey. Everything in the documentary is absolute gospel truth. Just. Some people knew how much I was contributing to the show, and other people really, to this day, have no idea that I was passing notes. It'll be interesting to see what people think.
Is there one moment or memory that just stands out more so than any other? I mean, you've had so many experiences, interviewed so many people. I mean, but is there one thing that just kind of is front and center on your mind?
And not really, because like you said, there's so many, but the night of the Private Parts premiere in Manhattan, and we all got to walk the red carpet, and I got to bring my wife and my manager and my sister and the president of my record company, and that was the hugest event. And Howard came in the Pope-mobile, and that was as colossal a night as it could possibly be. And then, some of the things that were just so crazy. We were sitting there one morning on the radio, mics just went on, and boom, through the door, here comes Sam Kinison, Pat McCormick, Jack Riley from the old Newhart show, and Chuck McCann.
Wow.
They were in Los Angeles, and they were doing coke, and Sam said, come on, let's go do the Stern Show. Come on, we'll take my jet. And they got in his jet and flew to New York and came bursting. And me and Fred are sitting there with like the Mount Rushmore of comedy standing behind us. And that really does stand out in my mind as like, holy crap, how did that happen?
That was it. That was it, man. Man, what a great life, and what a great story. And again, thanks for doing this, Jackie. By the way, I want everybody to call Tom Selleck at home. This is Jackie's joke line, which is 516-922-WINE. It's still, is it 40 years? It's been going on for 40 years. 44. Oh man,
1979. And we started it. The reason I started the line was to promote the very first comedy show on Long Island. There weren't any comedy clubs. That show grew into the East Side Comedy Club, but that line was specifically to promote the show that we were doing in Huntington, the first comedy show on Long Island. And and it was just famous. You know, Rick Rubin, the famous producer, who's so monstrous. The first time he came on the show, I think we were doing the Grammys or something in Los Angeles at the Roosevelt Hotel, and all the different radio stations would be in the big ballroom, around the perimeter. And so the celebrities could go from show to show, from Buffalo to Kansas City, whatever. And Rick Rubin came and sat down across from us, and the very first thing, when he sat down, he looked at me and said, "Jackie, I called 922-WINE every morning of high school." He went to school in like Long Beach or somewhere on the South Shore, in like the 5 towns, and that what a wonderful endorsement. This is Long Beach. He was already Rick Rubin, but he wasn't that Rick Rubin yet.
Right, sure.
Just classic, and I love stories like that.
Oh, absolutely. The documentary is called Joke Man. Is that going to be on Amazon Prime, or where's it going to be?
It's. I know it's on iTunes. It's going to be on Amazon. It's on a real lot of streaming services. But what happens is if it gets attention, then it gets moved up.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That's just how it works. So I don't know any of the whys and wherefores. I just know it's going to be in a whole bunch of different platforms. But I'm sure if you Google Joke Man, and all the connections are on jokemanmovie.com. So if somebody just goes to jokemanmovie.com, it'll tell you exactly what to do, where to go. And the feedback has been colossal. So we really got our fingers crossed that it's going to be a home run.
It is. It's great. And thanks again. I knew you were on vacation. I wanted to catch you before I went on vacation.
It was my pleasure. I owe you. If there's ever anything I can do for you, do not hesitate.
Oh, don't you worry. I've been looking for a pair of coattails to grab onto for a lot of years in this business. Jackie Martling, Jackie the Joke Man, so many different things. I mean, guy's brilliant because there's just so many different things that this guy was doing, early on. He figured out the jokes could be his way. Stand-up comedy, the joke line, and of course the big break, sending his tape out to this guy, Howard Stern, who is just starting to break through in the radio industry. If it wasn't for Howard, would Jackie have still been discovered? Probably by someone. I think that was definitely the best case scenario. The guy has held so many different jobs. He's had such a crazy life. I know he was talking about, working at that ritzy restaurant when he was just a teenager. He was a gymnast in high school. Just an incredible story, which, by the way, you can check out because of the new documentary, Joke Man. I'm not saying if it wasn't for Jackie the Joke Man Martling that Howard Stern wouldn't be anything. I'm just saying this guy really helped Howard get to become the king of all media quickly and launched him into the stratosphere. A lot of people don't realize it's the behind the scenes guys that mean a lot, and you'll be able to see that for yourself in this documentary, Joke Man. Thanks so much for listening. Of course, we would appreciate a 5-star rating and leave a review. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. Celebrity Jobber Podcast on Instagram. And for all past episodes, you can check out celebrityjobber.com. Until next time, I'm Jeff Zito.